All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Town Hall. We're here tonight for a work session to discuss a potential homestead exemption here in South Kingstown. Today is Thursday, January 29, just after 7 p.m. Our first order of business, as always, is the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next on the agenda is the land acknowledgement statement. The town of South Kingstown pays homage to the indigenous people and land in which the town is now located. Let this acknowledgement serve as a reminder of our ongoing efforts to recognize, honor, reconcile, and partner with the Narragansett tribe whose land and water we benefit from today. All right, we're going to dive right into it now. We have a presentation from the town staff. I'm going to hand it over to Town Manager Jim Manny.
Thank you. Tonight is the Town Council Homestead Exemption Work Session number 2 on today's date at 7 to 9 p.m. Brian, let's go to page 2 on this, please. Oh, who's doing it? Jess, I'm sorry. First thing I want to do is thank the staff that worked on this. They worked very hard on this. They had at least 12 substantial meetings with the entire crew together, which took anywhere from 1 to 2 hours on each time we met, and then more study, and then come back. And even today at late afternoon, we were still revising this because it's very complex. We want to make sure the numbers, even though they're approximate, we want to make sure they're accurate. But that team is the building inspector, Jamie Gorman, Jamie Rabbit, our planning director, our tax assessor, Wendy Duarte, finance director, Brian Sylvia, Jess Spent, my executive assistant, and Erin Vanass, who's a new face to the table here, but Erin was the one really tabulating a lot of the numbers for us. She has a background in that. And so it was very helpful, but I just felt compelled to introduce this team. So this packet looks very big, and it's a little intimidating, but it won't be. I can get through this within 25 minutes, maybe spend a minute on each page, and then obviously if you have any questions, you can stop me, and the team can answer, but I think everything will be self-explanatory. But this is a very comprehensive look at the homestead from the start to where we are right now, because I'm sure there are people at home or people attending these sessions that haven't been following that closely, and so we need to rewind the tape and then move forward. So let's look at page 2 first. We had a work session, which was number 1 on Thursday, October 21st, 7 to 9 p.m., which was the first work session we had, which reviewed the homestead proposal and discussed some of the impacts on residents, and council members were going back and forth, asking questions and trying to narrow down the scope of what a homestead possibly could look like. So I'm going to be paraphrasing a lot of this rather than reading right from the pages. If you look on page 3, the town of South Kingstown, it is required to have enabling legislation from our General Assembly to enact a homestead exemption, which our General Assembly did. And it was enacted on April 18, 2025, became effective in 12/31/2025. And I'll just paraphrase some of this as well. The town council is authorized to annually fix the amount. So this homestead that was passed in our General Assembly allowed a homestead exemption, if you look at the first bullet, the bottom line, in an amount not to exceed 10% of the assessed value. And that's generally the maximum amount you can, any city or town can. Providence had one different than this, but almost all the towns have that 10% threshold that they could possibly have a homestead. The exemption applies to property used exclusively for residential purposes, less than 5 units, or real property used for a combination of residential and commercial uses. And you can see the rest of the bullets here that really get into square footage. Let's go to the bottom bullet. In the event the property is granted an exemption under this section is sold or transferred during the year which the exemption is claimed, the town council, the town council may provide for a proration of the homestead exemption. So if it's sold or purchased, whatever, you can prorate the amount of the homestead exemption. So once again, just there's a number in there that says up to 10%. Doesn't say it must be 10%. Page 4, what is a homestead exemption? A city or town of Rhode Island must receive authorization from the General Assembly, which I mentioned. The second step is enacting an ordinance that specifies the rules and regulations governing eligibility for the exemption. Another step is the homestead exemption would take effect on the first assessment date after the ordinance is enacted. Rhode Island general law does not provide a definition for homestead, although we define it as it's a homestead exemption which would provide property tax relief to a piece of property in town that's owner-occupied. So we're using the term owner-occupied. That is generally what towns use as a definition to get to allow someone to get a homestead exemption. What are the qualifications that someone could possibly get a homestead exemption? The owner must apply annually between January 1st to May 1st. The owner must hold title to the property as of December 31st and reside at the property for at least 6 months plus 1 day of the year. The owner cannot rent any portion of the single-family home. Neither the owner-occupied applicant nor spouse is receiving an owner-occupied rate or homestead exemption or other personal exemption for another piece of property located elsewhere, anywhere in Rhode Island or any other state in the United States, for the same period of time that the owner is seeking an owner-occupied rate for property in South Kingstown. It will prevent someone who owns several properties, one's in Florida, one's here, they're getting a homestead down there, they cannot get one up here. So what would be the qualifications to prove proof of residency, the bottom bullet? It could be through 3 of the following: a voter registration here in town, a state tax return for Rhode Island, a federal tax return claiming Rhode Island as your primary residence, a Rhode Island driver's license or state ID, and/or a motor vehicle registration. Page 6. These are the communities that have enacted the homestead exemption, and you'll see the dates that they did it. There's 11 cities or towns that have a homestead exemption, and there are, if you look on the right, there are tiered residential tax rates, which we just put that in there so you're aware that isn't kind of an alternative to a homestead, or you could use both. 7, the baseline for a homestead exemption. A possible homestead exemption is based on the certified 2025 tax roll, which is the year end of December 31st, 2024. That's why you can see it's critical to have members of the tax assessors here, because their role in this would be quite large. The calculations will change once the town reconciles the 2024 statistical evaluation. Currently, the town is working on the 2026 roll, which will be certified June 15th, 2026, for the year that ended in December 31st, 2025. Let's go to page 8. You're going to see in many of these pages that we're going to be giving you a lot of information on demographics, age, incomes, average values, and so forth, which is really, once again, it's a very comprehensive package to give you as the town council a really good idea of what this town is composed of, the demographics. But let's get into one of the first discussions on that. The total number of properties on the tax roll of 14,302. Of that, the single-family owner-occupied is 7,443, which is 52% of the number of 14,302. And if you look at the second line, single-family non-owner occupied is 1,831, which is 13% of 14,302. So the total single-family homes in this town are 9,274, which represents 65% of the total number of properties of 14,302. All other properties in this town is 5,028, which is 35% of the total number of properties. So you look at the bottom, what are all other properties? 2 to 5 families, estates, farms, seasonal, other improved land, residential vacant, vacant other, residential on leased land, residential condominium, documiniums, farm forest, open space, mobile homes, does not include tangibles. So that's the breakdown of all the properties on our tax roll. If you go back to that number in the middle, so basically let's concentrate on this number. There are 9,274 single-family homes in this town. 7,443 we are using as the number that they are single-family owner-occupied. Well, why are we using that number, which represents about 80% of the 9,274? It's because we don't know exactly how many single-family owner-occupied there are in town, but we do know that 80% of the tax bills go to the address listed on the property. So we're using that number, that the 80% of the single-family owner-occupied homes, 80% of that 9,274, the tax bill's going to their home. So that's the best estimate that we have of what this town is composed of. 80% owner-occupied, 20% not. Page 9. We put that in big, bold percentages and numbers because that is going to drive your decision on whether this town can do a homestead exemption. So once again, total single-family eligible for a homestead is estimated at 80% of all single-family homes. 80% of the people who own them would be estimated eligible for a homestead exemption. All others, including commercial, would have to, the tax impact would be shifted on the savings of the 80% people that got a homestead. You have 20% of all the properties left that would then face an increased tax impact. And once again, all of the properties is defined at the bottom. Let's go to page 10. One of the suggestions that was presented to this committee that was working on this was that we should look at 600,000, 700,000, or 800,000 as a threshold on the maximum assessments that would that you could be eligible for a homestead. So what does that mean? If you want $1 million home, and we give 3 different scenarios, we'll break it down. If you have $1 million under the 600,000, let's use that number first. If your home's worth $1 million, you would only be eligible for 5% of the first $600,000 in assessments. So you'd be getting about a $30,000 eligibility, 5% of that. And we'll go over those numbers. So we'll go over those numbers. That's where we're really going to be looking at the first scenario that was asked of us. So let's look at these numbers on page 10 now. The resident owner-occupied homes under 600,000 are about 4,007, 53.8% of the total. 600,000 to 700,000, there are 1,229 homes resident owner-occupied, 16.5%. 700 to 800,000 values, 722 homes, that's 9.7%. Homes valued over $800,000 are about 1,485, represents 20% of the 7,443 number. Let's look at non-resident owner. The totals are right there. Under $600,000 value of the home, you have 850 of those. From $600,000 to $700,000, you have 195 of those homes. From $700,000 to $800,000, 137 homes. And over $800,000, 649 homes, for a total of 1,831 homes, non-resident owner occupied. That means they would not be eligible for a homestead. Let's look at the commercial properties in this town. There are 357 commercial properties, and you can see the values under 600, 600 to 700, 700 to 800, or over 800. You can see that breakdown as well. Whatever is remaining are now going back, they're called all other parcels. 4,671 right in the middle of the page. Page 11. The total tax levy on all taxable properties right now in this town is $79,178,320. Once again, we go over that number again. There are 14,302 properties on our tax roll. The total number of tax-exempt properties, 709, subtract that. The total number of taxable properties, not including tax-exempt, are 13,593. And look at the breakdown in the middle. What is the levy on the single-family properties? What is the value of those? All single-family properties, $4.9 billion. Under all other properties, minus the tax-exempt, $3.9 billion. So the subtotal of properties on our tax roll are valued at approximately $8.8 billion. There's a lot of numbers on this page, but I think if I say any more, it'd be confusing. You can see the breakdown right here, and especially on that graph on the side. Page 12, the U.S. Census, South Kingston data, U.S. Census. This is 2023, so it is a little outdated, but we don't have any more recent numbers. This is very interesting. Just look at the population breakdown by age on that graph. So over 65 years old in this town as of 2023, it was nearly 22%, but the largest number was 5 to 19 years at 24%. We have a student enrollment breakdown on the right. You have a graph for that. Once again, just more information for the town council to absorb so you can make your decisions. Let's look at the South Kingstown data on the U.S. Census 2023, the median income, $111,063. And the median property value, this is page 13, is $586,350. Look at the property values breakdown in the graph on the left. We went over those numbers previously, but this is the graph of that. So you can see how the values of our properties break down. Look on the right, the household annual income breakdown. So you can see of pretty much how much people make in this town if you look at the graph on the right. This was taken from the U.S. Census. Let's go to page 14. The reason I included this is because I know that you might be asked a question at some point, well, if the enabling legislation was for 10% homestead exemption, why are we discussing a 5% or lower or higher? Why isn't it automatically just a 10%? After we talked about this several months ago, it was a consensus of the town council that 10% homestead exemption was way too much money to be given at 80% of the homeowners in this town. It would not work. It would cripple the remaining 20% of the people that were getting this tax impact shifted to them. So if you look at this sheet here, this statistic really was the one that I really was an eye-opener for me. You would have to raise taxes by a substantial amount, 6.04%, correct, Brian? On everyone, including the people eligible for the homestead. And then those people would then get a 10% reduction in their taxes. So all the people paying taxes would get a 6.04% increase in taxes, so that the 7,443 eligible households could get the 10% homestead, but really the net would only be 3.96% savings. Because you're raising 6%, you're going down 10%, so you're really only going to get 4% savings. That was a very telling statistic on why that 10% really wouldn't work. The town council directed the staff to look at a 5% homestead exemption. It's page 16. And once again, we go to that $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 threshold that we were using, which means if someone has a $2 million house, the reason there was a threshold, they're not going to get a 5% homestead tax exemption, possibly, on the entire value of their home, only the first $600,000 of value to their home. So what this means is, under the resident owner occupied, this was option 2, 5% homestead tax exemption on assessed property value of $600,000 or less. Let's go right to the numbers at the bottom. On a piece of property that was valued at just say $600,000, let's use that number, and they got a 5% homestead, which would reduce their assessment by $30,000 with a tax rate of $8.94. It would then be raised to $9.15. The bottom line is this: they would save $148.50 per year. The non-residential owners and commercial property property owners would see an increase of $126. That's based on a $600,000 threshold for an assessment deduction. Go to $700,000, next page. Resident owner occupied would save $159, the ones that are eligible. The non-resident owners commercial would see an increase of $161. Let's go back to page 17, Brian. I've skipped something. The number on the bottom in red. What is the tax revenue deficit? This is the tax revenue deficit on a 5% homestead if enacted with this scenario, $600,000, $1.767 million. What does that mean? That means that's what this town would be short in revenue on taxes collected. That is the number that would have to be transferred as an impact to the remaining group of property owners that do not have a homestead. If you go to the next scenario, $700,000, go right to the bottom again. The tax revenue deficit would be $1.891 million. That would be the revenue lost in taxes to the town that would have to be made up to maintain the current level of services. Go to the next page, page 19. Go right to the bottom. Tax revenue deficit would be $1.971 million if you went to a threshold of the first $800,000 of your assessed value. Let's go to page 20. That summarizes all of it. The tax revenue deficit if a 5% homestead is enacted. And let's go over that. The revenue deficit on a $600,000 scenario is $1.767 million. On a $700,000 tax assessed value exemption, $1.891 million shortfall. On an $800,000 5%, 800,000 scenario would be $1.971 million would have to be shifted to the people that are not eligible for a homestead exemption. So that's the portion on homestead exemptions. With the scenario that the town council presented us with, look at 6, 7, 800 at 5%. If we can go to you also directed us, if you look at the next page, the staff, to look at expand or increase personal exemptions as another possible option. That's option 3. So option 1, we did not continue to be, it was the 10% homestead exemption. Option 2 was the 5% homestead exemption. Option 3 was expand or increase personal exemptions. Let's go to page 22. The existing current personal exemption totals. With the current personal exemptions that this town is offering right now, you look at that number in red, it's valued as of 2024 at $133 million. That is the exempted amount that we are not taxing on. Let's go to page 23. Even though it's option 3, now we're talking about personal exemptions only. We're not talking about the numbers that we were looking at in the beginning. That was a whole different option. This one here, if you offered a flat credit amount, some towns do this. That's why we included it as a possibility. To all seniors age 65 and older, South Kingston has 7,033 eligible seniors per the 23 U.S. Census. Deb, you have a question? Go ahead.
So the towns that offer a flat credit, like you're talking about, do any of them also have a number of years as a resident, or do you get it when you live here for 0 years, or is it 5 years, 10 years?
Yep, so that's a good question. So if you look at any one of those towns, there isn't one menu that they all follow the same. But basically, it's this. You have to be a resident of this town at a minimum of 6 months and a day to, it could go up to 5 years. That is something that would be a policy decision made by the council. How do you want to define a full-time resident in this town? 6 months and a day? Or do you want to go up to a year, 2 years, 3 years as a resident before you're eligible for this?
No, I'm meaning like if you've owned your home for 5 years and
Yeah.
you're 65 versus, are they asking anybody, if I'm 65 and I buy a home, I instantly get that credit? What is this proposal?
So we didn't define it that way. If you're a resident and you're age 65 in that current year that you're eligible, you would get it.
So are any, and maybe Amy knows, are any municipalities also having the qualifier, you have to have been a homeowner for a certain number of years? Looking around. Has anyone seen that?
It's like a two-tier. You have to be a resident here for a certain period of time to qualify for a homestead. That's one, right? Whether it's however you define it, 6 months and a day, or 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, that's up to you to define that. And that will be part of the question. But with this would be age 65, you would get a flat rate exemption in the year that we would offer it. So every year, whatever, if you turn 65 in year 2, you would get it. Year 1, you would get it. But you still must qualify as a resident for that amount of time that the council has determined they should be here.
Just before we move off that question, at the last workshop, I had raised the issue with Mike. There's an old case about welfare benefits, Shapiro versus Thompson, back in the Nixon administration. I just question whether you can impose a 2, 3, 5 year residency requirement.
I did review that email exchange in preparation for tonight's meeting, and if I recall correctly, our advice was, yes, that case is still good law. It's a different context, though. In Rhode Island, residency requirements for homestead exemptions have not been tested. All the municipalities that have homestead exemptions have them. So is it a potential issue for someone to challenge? Yes, I guess it's a potential issue, but I'm comfortable advising the council, if that's the consensus, to enact a homestead exemption with a residency requirement. I'm comfortable knowing that most of the state is in the same boat that we would be.
Thank you.
Councilman Bergen, did I answer the question? So it's really like two-tier. You need to qualify to get the homestead, number one, and then age 65 would kick in if you go to this scenario, like the year that you qualify. So you have to qualify that you live here as a resident, and then if it's, say it's next year, you start this with a flat rate, whatever, if you turn 65 in that period of year, maybe it'd be prorated or whatever.
So maybe it was my own myth that I created, was that you had to also have lived in the community for a certain amount of time before you were eligible for it. So that, as Amy's saying, it's never been tested where, in order to get it, because you could clearly reduce who is eligible and provide a better benefit if you weighted it towards, we're going to try to reward or assist people who have lived here for a longer time versus someone who comes in and lives here for a year.
You absolutely could.
But it's not tested. Is that
So
what Amy's?
that'll ultimately be a policy decision up to us.
That would be, that would
Okay.
be.
So I think we can dive deeper into that at the conclusion of the presentation.
Right.
Right, well,
Can we
that,
just,
yeah, I understand. It just, when he was saying other communities do a flat tax, my follow-up question was, does it also, I mean, a flat credit, does it also
It's
have
just-
those years
I-
of living
it's just-
here? I understand.
there's so much else.
Yeah,
Okay.
you'd have to be eligible for the homestead, and then if you turn 65, whenever that time, then, so it'd be like a two-tier. If you turn 65, if you're 70 and you live here for a year, it wouldn't matter. I'm sorry?
Go ahead.
Okay. So that's just one scenario you could, a flat rate for anyone over age 65. That's just one thing you could do. Not all communities offer it, some do. Let's go to page 24. Okay. Next one. So what are the existing income-based elderly exemptions for people age 65 and above? So this is what this is a personal exemption that we currently have with these numbers and how many people qualify. All right, so you can see that breakdown. There's about 168 exemptions claimed, you know, with those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different income groups. So say you don't want to do a flat-based one and you want to do an income-based elderly exemption. This is what we currently have. You could expand that. So let's go to the next scenarios. Say you do a 10% increase on the amount that you want to offer people in that income group. So it went from, you know, the page before, so say it went up 10% on the bottom, 0 to 23,758. So you could go up, under the existing program, it's $2,472 you get as an exemption. If you go up 10%, it will go up to $2,719. So we have several scenarios for that. If you want to do it on an income-based exemption, I gave you the existing numbers. We have a 10%, you go to the next page, 20%, 30%, 40%, 50%. And if you look at all 10 to 50%, the number that the town would, now these are once again estimates. Let's go right to the, let's go back to the 10%. Let's go back to that. If you look at, on page 25, the 10% increase, so we have the existing exemptions, you add 10% on top of that if you want to go up 10%, like if the town has, the council has a policy decision, we're going to go up 10% on the exemptions for elderly. based on elderly exemption, 65 years and above. So what would the tax liability that would have to be shifted to all the taxpayers who aren't qualified for this? There's the number on the bottom, $315,591. If you go to the 20%, $351,000 would be shifted. You go to the next page, 30%, $380,000 we'd have a shortfall. The impact would be $380,000 has to be transferred to everyone who doesn't get this exemption. On 40%, it's $409,000, and on 50%, it's $439,000. Although those numbers sound, they're not, it's a far cry from the $1.7, $1.8 million tax impact shortfall we would have under the first, this option number 2, the 5% exemption. So Brian did these numbers over and over and over, and Wendy, these are the numbers that took quite a bit of time. I am cautioning the council, I should have said this in the beginning, I'm not looking for the council to make a decision tonight on, we're going with this, and this is how we're going to do it. If you narrow the lane even more to what you want us to study, then we will go back, the entire team, and really hone in on what, I'd really like to get a narrower focus on what you'd be looking for. Then we could really figure out not the exact tax impact, but closer. These are approximations. Let's go to page 30. So these are the once again, these numbers are the net change tax levy. Those are the gross before, these are the net. So if you're looking in the red, if you go all the way to the bottom, you know, from 10% to 50, this is what we would have to make up, the net amount, and this is what it would do to the tax rate increase for the town. And that's like, if you do 30%, it's 1 penny, 1.18, not a dollar, 0.18, 1 penny. And like the top is 0.44 cent. So this is very doable if you want to do it on personal exemptions. Let's go to the next page, accessory dwelling units. Now, we didn't run any scenarios there. We have an agenda item that's going to go on next session for another thing on ADUs, but this is just giving you the facts of how many ADUs we have now, how many exemptions are claimed, and what's the total exemption credit right now. We haven't made any recommendations on that, on ADUs. We're going to be studying that on February 9th, I think. And if you look at page 32, we're almost done. These are the existing veterans and family exemptions and legally blind exemptions. Existing. This is what we have right now in the books that we provide residents of this town that fit these different areas, these groups. Veterans, unmarried spouse of veterans, 100% disabled veteran, Gold Star parent, POW, and the totals. And then on page 33, last page, what would be the impact on town staff and what would we need to hire to manage a homestead exemption? So if you have, the number we use is 7,443, I think the number, exact number was. That's an approximation. But say it's 7,000 or 6,000 that are eligible. We still would need someone, because it's an annual thing, to bring all the documentation to verify that these people are eligible for a homestead. You would definitely need to hire a clerk and put it somewhere, probably in the tax assessor's office. And that's all they would work on, is that, because there's thousands, could be thousands of applicants every year where they would have to verify the information they have would make them eligible for a homestead. The dates of their residency, their age, whatever it is. That's it.
All right, thank you, Jim. Any questions? Go ahead.
Yeah. So my question is regarding the the income limits, we know that the average median income in South Kingstown most recently was like 75,000 for one person. And so 80% of that would be like 60,000. And so when we look at extending housing assistance to people, now we look at, like 60, 80%. So I would like us to consider maybe increasing from 45,000. My preference would be to go to 60 in income, just because that's consistent with the AMI. So
the median household income in South Kingstown, the household is 111,000.
right,
Where do you-
but for one person, I'm just assuming, like, I'm thinking of a single elderly person in the home, so I was just going at like 70, or that, it's 75 is for one person.
You don't have any data for that, though?
No, I do, but not right in front of me, but I could give it to you. There's that, let me look for it.
I have a follow-up to that, just going to touch on it because it sort of touched on the same thing. So I'm going to say the question that Patty had sort of in another way. Have we considered increasing the income levels by which we would provide an income-based exemption? And if so, is it predictable in the number of persons that would be eligible? Because I know now it's 168 exemptions claimed. It's based on what we know, what we've seen over the last few years. But if we increase the income levels, is that predictable? How do we get a sense of that?
It's a yes and no question. I do have handouts, or I can put it up on the screen if you like. I did run a scenario because we're running in parallel with the attorney's office to draft the ordinance for the elderly exemption already. So I have scenarios for COLA, but then I also have, if you want to increase that bracket, which it sounds like that's the appetite here, so it would increase depending on what you wanted to do. So if you increase that maximum bracket, which currently is at $45,197, if you increased it to 10%, that threshold would be raised to $49,717. Predictability, how many more people would we capture to assist? On average, correct me if I'm wrong, Erin, we do deny people who come in who think they're at that bracket. I'd say less than 10. Not a lot, but they would know not to, they think they're at the 45, and we vet them with their income tax return or whatever it is they provide, and that's how that rolls out. If you were to increase that income bracket from 45,197 and up that 20%, that would go to 45,236. You could do 30, 40, and if you went up to 50%, it would increase that bracket to, it sounds like Councilwoman Ellie is asking for something in that 60 range, 50% increase to that top tier, so it would go from $45,197 to $67,796. And you are correct, for COLA, we've discussed with the Attorney's Office where we would embed it into the ordinance, and that would follow every year with whatever Social Security Administration. It's usually 2 to 4, 2.4, 2.6, 2.7, it changes. Now, HUD is different. It would go more like 4 to 5%, and that does correlate with a real-world scenario of affordability for housing. So actually, give me one moment. I have the 2025 HUD here somewhere. All right, the 2020, well, maybe you should do 2024. 2024 income limit. So depending on household size. So one person at the 2024 HUD scenario is very low, and that's at 39,350. The 80% LMI is 62,950. So that, if you wanted to go that route and increase the brackets for income, it would correlate to HUD.
And also
We'd have
the
to define
poverty level is like 15,000. So looking at the people at that very low income, like how can I really want to make sure that we're exacting the most relief to people who really need it, you know?
And if you ran this, let's say you want it, it's your decision, what course you want to go, but if you went with the 50% and you wanted to go with the income to extend that to 67,796, President McEntee, I could assume quickly based on census, and I don't have it right now off the top of my head, but we could come up with some type of estimate based on that 2023 census, but it's unpredictable how many you could capture from that 40, that window from that 45,197 to the 67,796. Maybe talking 100, 500, I couldn't tell you.
So then, based on sort of the unknown there, we wouldn't be able to know what the sort of lost revenue related to that would be, which would have to be made up by everyone who's not eligible for this credit.
Correct.
But I guess at a subsequent meeting, if we wanted to explore that, you could gather numbers to present that.
I could do that.
Good.
All right, just to follow up on what Rory was asking, to get a better overall picture, can you explain where these income groupings come from in the first place? And I've got a couple of other follow-ups.
They've been established on the books for years. I couldn't tell you exactly the start point, but for the last 5 years, they've increased with COLA. So every year or 2 or 3, the assessment or the assessor at the time would come back, request that the increase happen, and a lot of the times, because of some of the turnover we've had, it hasn't happened, which is now, if we were, let's say you're not going to want that scenario where you would increase the income, regardless, that would need to happen anyway. And I believe you've instructed me to work with the attorney's office that we could do that. So it's really, what direction would you like us to go? And would it run parallel, or, would you want this embedded into the ordinance, or is this something separate?
You also mentioned the HUD figures and LMI. Can you just spell that out?
I can. So for fiscal year 25, I think I gave you 24. I've got a couple of years here, but for the most recent one I have for fiscal year 25, this is income limit for Providence, Fall River metro area, and we're in that area. The median income, they're saying 114. We have 111, but the 80% LMI, is that what you're asking?
Basically, at this point, just the L. What does the L stand for?
Oh, low.
All right.
Low, moderate income, LMI, I'm sorry.
That's fine. And that actually leads into the follow-up question, which is, with this limit at 45,197, I don't have any statistics, but just from personal experience, that could be a husband and wife in one household living on a fixed income of 2 Social Securities.
Correct, it's household income, or that's how we have it now. So if you are a senior and you have, someone a child that is not necessarily a child, if I'm working and I'm in the house with my parent, you would still have to report that as household income, and then they may or may not qualify. But that 45,197 is right in between the very low and extremely low.
Right, and that's my concern for the benefit of the council is we've already set the bar fairly low for being eligible for this program.
Thank you for preparing this really great packet. It's helping us answer a lot of questions that we had. I'm supportive of the homestead exemption because it's, it provides affordability for the families and folks in South Kingstown need it. And I'm glad that we talked about personal exemption, expanding that, increasing that. One thing I thought was interesting in the packet was a couple of the numbers. 53% resident owner occupied under 600,000 or 600,000 or below. That's a huge number at the majority of our homes here. Well, I know, but so we're looking for this homestead exemption to provide it for people that really need it, right? And, the numbers, 65 plus is 21%, 55 to 64 is 13%, that's about 22% of the town. 35 to 54 is 17%, 20 to 34 is 19%, it's about 36% of the town. And I think for equity, we definitely want to strengthen the senior exemptions, but I think that where I'm leaning at this point is giving a homestead exemption up to 600,000 of their tax levy of the home, because again, someone that has a home that's above 600,000, they're still going to appreciate a tax break, but I do think that a majority of the homes 53% will feel the immediate savings, and I think that it'll help with the affordability from seniors to young families that are going to be putting in our new high school, so we can, feed that pipeline and have young families still live in South Kingstown. I think they all need a break.
Can I ask a simple question? Go ahead. So the homestead exemption requires an additional staff member. If we were just to expand the exemptions in the income limit, would that require additional staff?
Probably not.
Probably not. Because after the first work session, a resident reached out to me and said, you're going to increase everybody's taxes, spend an extra $90,000 on a clerk, and we're all going to save $100. That seems kind of crazy. That was their whole thinking. We're going to spend $90,000 so a group of homeowners can save $100. It didn't seem to make sense when they're the constituent, right? And so I kind of lean towards it's cleaner, easier, and more measurable impact to the most vulnerable if we focus on the exemptions. I hear what people are saying, but if someone were to get $150, I don't think when people come to the microphone, that's what they expected us to land at. And we'll hear from some people from the public, but I don't know. I kind of want to explore the exemptions, and maybe I love that from the last work session, you're going to continue on with the COLAs and make that baked in so it's easier for your workload. But I think we need to look at really talking about whether we want to increase the income limits or we want to increase the actual exemption amount, or are we doing both?
One item that I didn't mention, and I think is very important to the conversation, is people ask, well, how do other towns or cities do this? And it has to be based on the demographic of that city or town. Let's use two examples. Block Island comes up. And Block Island, I think there are about 2,000, these are rough numbers, properties on that island. Only about 20%, maybe 20%, are owner occupied. So you can offer a homestead on Block Island because you can now shift 80% to the 80% of the property owners there. You can shift that increased tax impact to the 80% that are out of state, second homes, whatever. Look at even like our neighbor, Narragansett. How do they do it? There are 9,000 properties there. 1/3 are owner occupied. 1/3 are pure rentals, and 1/3 are vacation homes. So they have a homestead because 1/3, about 3,000 properties, are owner occupied. Therefore, they can shift the tax impact to nearly 67% of the other people that own homes in that town. That's why that 80-20 split, that slide, that's probably one of the most important slides that you need to base your decision on, because if you choose to do a homestead based on those numbers, 80% of this town estimated are owner occupied. The larger the pool, the less impact you're going to get on a homestead. So that was just a point I wanted to make.
So that goes back to if you're interested in making an impact, you could base it on, which has yet maybe not been tested, you must have lived in South Kingstown for 5 years to be eligible. So then that person or that family has lived here. I think what I hear from people is long-term residents can struggle to live here because their home and the taxes go up, and maybe their income isn't because they've lived here for 50 years. So that's an interesting way to weight it, but I don't know. It's not presented in a scenario like that. That's why I asked if other communities do that.
I think one of the things, obviously, if money were no object, I would love to extend a generous homestead exemption to everyone. But when we zoom out and look at the big picture, we have to make sure that each element of our society is being cared for. And so we have, we have some new housing that's coming in at different price points that's going to help one segment of the population. We have a new high school being built that is going to be fantastic for the kids in the future. And then you have these homestead, or not, these personal exemptions that are stuck in a long time ago. And these are the things that impact our elderly residents who don't have the opportunity to, pick up a side hustle or do whatever. So I feel that in the way that we've taken a lot of care with the other elements of our society, I think we need to, I would feel most comfortable in really sort of buffing up these exemptions to a place where they're in line with reality, because right now it's, it's very low income. So these people are hurting.
So I have a few thoughts. I'm going to start with the personal exemptions. We explored the potential flat fee to those 65 or older as compared to income-based. Now we've only looked at potentially increasing the credit as opposed to increasing the income eligible for the credit. I would rather, and I believe Patty Alley's along the same lines, is increase the income groups that are eligible for the exemption, but keep the credit the same as it is. Does that make sense? I'd like to explore what that looks like. I think that the potential lost revenue, and I'm speculating because I don't know the figures here, will not be sort of immense enough to sort of defray us from doing that. Like, I'm hopeful that we can do that and it won't be too much of a bad effect. It also addresses those that have the most need for exemption. I've talked to people 65 and older who've told me, you got to increase these income levels. We make just over that. We're not eligible. Those are outdated, and I agree. So I think we should look to see what that looks like. I totally support that. As opposed to a flat fee, which would mean anyone 65 or older would be given an exemption regardless of their income, regardless of their assets. And I just think that doesn't sort of address those who need it. As to the veteran and blind exemptions, when's the last time we've increased that?
1974.
Wendy, do you know the answer to that one?
I do. Bear with me one moment. Homestead. Okay, I heard the second part of the question. When was the last time we updated the blind exemption? What was the
Yeah,
first
the
part?
veteran and blind exemptions, when's the last time we increased those?
Blind exemption.
And even if we don't know that, is this something that we could sort of either change the ordinance or whatever is needed to allow your office to just change it annually to reflect some sort of matching an increase in inflation or COLA?
Yes, so to answer the question about the visually impaired person or the blind exemption, that is through the state. The exemption on the books for our code refers to the state, and unfortunately, the state exemption is different than what we're doing, so we have to clean that up anyway. So
do we even have an ability to administer the veteran and family exemption in a way that allows us to increase it annually to align with COLA adjustments? Do we have that ability if it's a state statute?
I don't see why you couldn't, but I'm not the attorney.
Let me look into that, and I should have an answer within the next few minutes.
All right. Now, in regard to the income-based credit, in the event, I guess we change the ordinance to increase those income groups that are eligible for the credit, we do have the authority to allow your office annually to just increase it to something equal to whatever the COLA is for that particular year.
COLA, HUD,
Whatever we
whichever
decide,
direction
essentially.
you decide
So we
is
could
what
build
we'll
whatever we
do.
decide into
You can
the
build
ordinance.
it.
Okay. Now, going over to the homestead. If we go to page 17, 18, 19, wherever we are on those. Now, when we look at the different rates here, you do a comparison, tax rate 894, tax rate 915. Now, the way this would actually work is you'd have to increase the tax rate to a certain amount and then provide a homestead exemption credit against the tax bill. Is that how you would do this? Can you walk me through that? Because obviously you increase the tax rate to adjust for the lower assessment, and it nets out to total savings. Like we can see that on the left.
That's correct. So just using for one example, just to answer your question, I want to make sure I get the right one in front of me. The 600,000, that would, the 5% at a $600,000 threshold, that would result in a loss in assessments projected of 197 million, sorry. And to make that up, and that would result in, as mentioned before, the loss in revenue, I'm sorry, I was fine print. That was the 800,000, apologies. The loss, oh, I had that right the first time. I was on the right page. So that the 600,000 on the 5% scenario would result in a loss in assessed value. So that would come off the books of 197 million. And that would result, as mentioned previously, a loss in tax revenue of 1.7 million. To make up that money, the rate would be increased from $8.94, which it is currently, to $9.15. And that would rebalance the town to where we are neutral and not in a deficit any longer.
All right, so in the books and records here, to actually get to the tax rate, you actually apply the exemption against the assessments and then figure the tax rate from there. Okay.
Yes.
I got a few more questions. If it's on the topic.
And I have an
Molly.
answer to the question about veterans exemptions. State law sets a floor for the exemption, but not a ceiling. So if we're increasing the amount from what's in our ordinance currently, we don't need enabling legislation. The town council can just do that by ordinance.
Excellent.
So how are we not meeting state law then?
That was for the blind exemption. The veterans exemption, every few years, I think we just did it, actually, I have it here. 23, I believe. Just bear with me a moment.
Can you stack those, Wendy? Can you be a veteran and be blind and you can stack them all?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
We did in 2018, 2020, and 2021. So every few years, just like the elderly, we come back.
Well, just to follow up on what you said, Brian, if we went from the 894 rate to the 915, do we bump up against the state cap, the 4%?
No, the cap is on the levy increase, and this would be a levy neutral. So we'd be, yes.
Now, Brian, when you look at this slide, now I could just foresee, there's a potential assessed value that's a break-even point. At some point, the assessment, there's going to be like no yielded savings. And at some point, you'll still get the relief, but you'll be actually incurring a larger tax. Do we know what that assessed value is under the exemption of up to $600,000 in value? And do you understand my question?
No, I don't.
Okay.
We don't have that number. So that means if you have like a $3 million house and you're getting the first 600,000, you're getting tax relief on that, at what point the value of the home does it negate itself or make it even worse?
Yes.
Yeah, we don't have that number.
Okay. All right, another question. I want to ask, if you go to slide 8. All right, here we identify, the percentage of those properties in town that are single-family owner-occupied, non-owner occupied, and then all others. You identify what the makeup of the all others are. Any idea of that 35% of all other properties, what is commercial? Or I guess of the 5,028 properties, how many of that is commercial?
Right, Wendy? 357.
So about, what's that, 5% of the 35%? So that's a pretty small portion.
So I was wondering, I was noticing that seems like a very large number, all other properties. Is it land trust? I kind of go, who could own that? Is it the land trust? Is it, what is that? What are those parcels?
If you look on the footnote under all other properties, you've got 2 to 5 family, which is 484 properties. You have estate, which is 1. Farm, 12. Seasonal, 103. Other improved land, 105. This all totals the 5028. Now, other towns, for the purpose of Homestead, have rolled in their 2 to 5 families and the residential condos. But for the scenario, because we have the stock of this town is so heavily weighted with single families, most likely the number wouldn't be too much weight. But if you wanted to finesse it more, you could do that.
All right, I want to go to that slide where you show the 80-20. So we can find that for me. I think that's the next slide, maybe. Right there. All right, we touched on this at the last meeting. Now, we base our projection of the makeup of the single-family owner-occupied versus all others based on where it is that they get their tax bill mailed to, right? That's usually a pretty good indicator as to whether it's owner-occupied or not. It's not absolute, but it's a good indicator, okay? We've come to this 80-20% here. Now, if the homestead exemption is enacted and implemented, those persons are going to have to, who want the homestead, are going to have to provide 3 of the 5 sort of identity proving that this is your owner-occupied single-family residence, okay? And once that happens, there will most likely weed out people, right? And these percentages will change. It is likely that the number of single-family owner-occupied will decrease from 80% to something less, and all others will increase from 20% to something more. And when that happens, if we go back to that slide of the 600,000, let's go to page 8. Is this page 8? Yeah. All right, let's go to, page 17. So if that happens, the number of owner-occupied reduces from 80% to something less, and all others increases from something of 20% to more. Do the savings increase for the owner-occupied, or do they remain the same?
I can answer that. If you decrease the number that are eligible, the savings would increase.
Okay. I'm going to go to my next point. Okay. And if the number of non-owner occupied, all other, increases from 20% to something in excess of that, the increase that is offset to each individual property, looking at this, that number would reduce. Correct?
Yes.
So it is likely, because we base this on wherever you get the tax bill mailed, which is a good indicator but not absolute, it's likely that the actual makeup, based on the documents we asked them to prove, if the homestead is implemented, the savings will be increased and the offset will actually be decreased on all their properties. Is that safe to say?
It is. So once again, the only absolute you would have is if you implemented the homestead, right? And then you get all these applications, and at the end of the day, you can count them, right? Now, but there's another very good clue that we're waiting on, the rental registration. So as of today, we only have maybe 90, 89 people have applied in the rental registration program that we started. Now, we do have till March 31st. We had to extend that. So we really don't even know how many properties are involved in our rental, how many are true rentals. Now, the other thing we're basing it on is Jamie Gorman has been looking statistically at the building inspector at how many have registered with the state, and it was just under 500. Is that right, Jamie? 4 change?
That's correct.
Yeah, so we don't know how many are really rentals in this town. Now, after March 31st, we'll have a better idea, but once again, that won't be absolute either, because I'm sure there'll be a lot of people, well, I'm sure there'll be people that won't register, so we'd have to track them down. So all this is based off an assumption based on where these tax bills are mailed, number one, and number two, on how many people will register under the rental registration requirement.
And I think that's a good thing, because this is conservative. We want it to be conservative. We sort of prepare ourselves that worst case, this is what it likely would be. But if it were actually implemented, it would actually have better yielding results. In my opinion, I think that it's fair to say based on what we just walked through, because it's likely that there will be less than 80% of single-family owner-occupied homes, which will result in more savings to those property owners and actually less of an increase to each of all other property owners. I think this is attractive. I think this is a good way forward. I think this actually addresses, the population that would be in need, and actually applies to all single-family owner-occupied, and that it applies up to 600,000. There is a break-even point. We don't know that. I think that's probably somewhat simple to figure out, not at this meeting, but at a subsequent time. But I think it really would give relief to those seeking it. I think it's a good thing. I think it's good policy. So I support it. So if we go toward this route, I think this would be the sort of the easiest one to go forth with. That's my thoughts.
One comment on that. Wendy and I have had this conversation. So the 80 of the tax bills that are going there, we estimate it's right at 80%, almost exact. But you also brought up there are some trust and there's some LLCs.
I mean, there's definitely ownership questions.
Yeah, ownership questions. So we don't know if they'll go down or up.
So can we weed those out? Like as part of any ordinance here enacted, we have to make it, individually owned or jointly owned by those who occupy as opposed to owned by an entity?
You'd have to define it. There are definitely LLCs on the books, but
I can pull those up.
Now, technically, it can be owned by an LLC and be owner occupied.
So Narragansett has the exact same enabling legislation for the homestead exemption that South Kingstown has, and Narragansett's ordinance allows property that's titled either to the resident personally, a trust to which the resident is the named beneficiary, or a corporate entity owned and controlled by the resident taxpayer. So that's not in the legislation. That's a policy choice that the council can choose to make, but that's how Narragansett handles it.
Thank you, Amy.
I would just be cautioned, because I think a lot of people do at some point consider putting their real estate in the trust that they live in for, to avoid. Yeah, there you go, not the lawyer. But, so I wouldn't want to exclude people who are making that decision for another reason, because they are living in their home. So, again, my biggest concern is if I don't know how people think that doesn't feel meaningful when people come and they talk about how expensive everything is. Just $148 isn't what I think people had in mind. I think I felt like North Kingstown, it was closer to $500, which is what they could give there. And I don't know what they did with that. I feel like I read it in the Independent a long time ago. I don't know if that's worth an outlay of staffing $125,000 a year for that. I kind of am much more interested in dealing with the marginalized, the invisible, the people who truly struggle, who may not come to the microphone and say, I have trouble making my basic needs. And I think that I'd rather go that way. As a start.
Jim, on the administrative cost, it makes sense that we'd have to hire someone that would about $90K with a full benefit package. I understand the $25,000, $50,000 for new and updated software. I'm wondering, what is costing $10,000 to $15,000 to set up a new desk in Jamie Gorman's office? Is it buying a whole new desk? Is it buying a computer? I just feel like we could onboard someone for somewhere cheaper.
Yeah, the computer's like about $4,000, the one that we would need. Software is very expensive.
Well, that's the $25,000 to $50,000. I'm talking about the office equipment, right? I just feel like we can onboard someone for cheaper than 10 to 15 grand.
You mean the equipment?
Right, a new desk, computer, and office equipment, and the desk would be in the building official's office. Tax assessor, excuse me.
Yeah, That's the estimate that I was given, 10 to 15,000 between computer, equipment, desk, the whole thing. I mean, maybe a thousand, couple of thousand for, full workstation.
I just have full faith that you could cut that cost, and so.
That's the last one I'm worried about. That one's peanuts. The 90,000 is the one I'm worried about. FTEs are very expensive.
I think as much as it sounds great, I think we could phase it in and do the exemptions 1 year, and another council could look at the next to see what that is. Because I feel like the world is so unpredictable. We have no idea on a daily basis what's going to happen next. And in this situation, I would prefer to go slow and measured and help the people who are probably going to be most impacted by the chaos that's coming.
I feel very strongly that way also. I mean, this country is in a rough spot now. This budget process is fraught with peril all over, from the top all the way down. And I am really concerned about people that are living, in the margins, and that weighs heavily. So I feel that we really have a way to go to improve what we have, and possibly when things are more settled, we could try to expand that.
Just to be clear, I don't think there's any opposition to expanding the personal exemptions. I think we're unanimous in that. I think in addition to that, we're also looking at the potential of a homestead. And I've already expressed my thoughts on it, but in responding to the cost to administer, I just want to ask a couple questions. So we enacted the rental registration ordinance. We delayed the effective or the registration date for the first year to March 31. When we had hearings related to that, we were able to project a certain number of rentals that were out there. I think we're even able to identify a number of short-term rentals out there based on air DNA data or registrations with the state. How many is that? Can you clarify that?
Right now on the state's website, which is pretty accurate to what we've gathered in the past, was 447, I think, last time I checked.
And that's just short terms?
Short-term only.
And short terms are subject to a fee of $300 annually?
Currently, yes.
Okay, and just simple math, 400 times 300 is about 120,000. What do we anticipate the cost of administering the rental registration to be? Any idea?
It's not nearly, Jamie, it's going to fall into you. I don't have that number in front of me.
Currently, the first year, we're going to understand if we're going to need additional part-time staff for a subsequent year, or perhaps have an outside agency to assist, but we think we can handle it internally, so no additional costs.
Okay, so really no sort of thought at this time that would require an additional FTE? We don't believe it would?
No, you won't need a new FTE for sure. It'll have some type of cost.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Now, this air DNA data, did it also show us how many long-term potential are out there based on state registration or registrations for lead, that are registered with the state, whatever that is?
So Air DNA could not provide, that was just short-term rentals only that they could provide. So the long-term rentals are very difficult to gather that data. A lot of the vendors were unable to, give a confident, that they could get us within a certain 10% threshold. But we do have the State Department of Health has a registry as all rental units are required to be registered for lead-safe properties. But that is, I think, around close to 500 that Jim said registered in South Kingstown, which isn't reflective of what we know would be all.
And how many of those are short-term? Any idea? Just to figure back into how many are long-term.
Yeah, we haven't cross-referenced those two spreadsheets of properties, to be honest, Mr. President.
And the reason I'm asking the question, I'm just trying to gain an idea of what the minimum amount of revenue that would be generated from the rental registration on an annual basis. And we talk about what are the additional costs to administer that? Well, we don't think it's going to be too much, at least from what you're telling us. We don't have a figure. but we look at what are the costs to administer a homestead, maximum 150,000. That appears to me to be the amount that we would generate from the rental registration ordinance. So I mean, if we're looking at where's the revenue going to come from, to me that seems to be an ideal place of where we could have an increase in revenue that we could ultimately use to fund administration of a homestead. It's one of the reasons we passed the rental registration to get us to a point to accumulate data, so we could use it sort of as a preface to get to a point where we could pass a homestead. So that just seems a natural place to me where we would sort of use the revenue and then expend it toward administration.
I have a comment on that. So if the state is, the number that I'm using that's not scientific on the number of rentals, short-term, long-term, you name it, is nearly 1,000 in this town. So if you do that 300 times 1,000, you'll have maybe $300,000 at the end. If we're getting 500 that voluntarily signed up on a state website where there's no enforcement, the number's got to be substantially higher than that. We have a lot of properties in the town. And so, like Narragansett has about 3,500 rentals. So even if we have 500 registered at the end of March 31st, now we're really going to start digging who's really renting their properties. That number will climb.
Thank you, Jim. Any other thoughts?
No, go ahead.
Mike, you haven't had a chance.
I just I wanted to echo what President McEntee said, that I think we're all in agreement to expand the exemptions for our seniors, for the blind, for our elderly, to increase affordability for them. But I'm also in agreement that page 17 is conservative, and it's possible that we'll have a lesser tax increase on the non-resident owners in commercial and a bigger increase for resident owner occupied. I think that I'm supportive of continuing down and narrowing down in that direction. And I think that, Councilwoman Bergner made a good point that sometimes our assumption about it was a homestead exemption would give $500 or a pretty astronomical number to help our residents. And I think in this process we learned a lot about the homestead exemption and what the numbers mean, what 10% and 5% mean and how that changes down. But I do think that $150 or more towards a working family will help them, and I think it really does directly go to them. And I think that continuing down and really meeting our word about what we said, enacting a homestead exemption, is going to be good for this town and good for the seniors, working families, and folks that really need a break.
Yeah, I've got a few things. On this, let's start with this chart on page 17, where you have a tax revenue deficit of $1.7 million. That doesn't take into account the staffing funds that you mentioned at the end?
No, sir, it doesn't.
All right, so that's going to increase that figure if we go in this direction, because you have to have somebody to administer it, number one. Number two, the $125,000 to $155,000 figure you used is for one staff person throughout the year, but the registration period that you're talking about is January 1 to May 31, I think?
Yeah, I don't have it in front of me. January to May, is that what we looked at? January 1st to May 31st?
So in addition to one person who's going to be working 52 weeks a year, you're going to have a very intense period with thousands of people potentially coming in, claiming that exemption in the first 5 months of the year. That's going to be even more for one person to try and handle, unless I'm missing something.
Well, I don't know that answer. I mean, it'll be very labor intensive, that's for sure, and it will be. But I'm only budgeting for one FTE. Right. I'm confident that even if we split it, when I do that number, like maybe it would, that person, say it is very labor intensive for 6 months total, And we use a half a position that's currently existing in the tax assessor. When it's not that busy, they can assist, and then this person could assist on the other end when it is busy with them. So once it's because they a jack of all trades, they're sharing work in all directions. But it definitely would, I'm going by the numbers that I remembered from Narragansett. They had like 4 people administering the rental registration, the homestead. It was very labor intensive. I remember it was very busy.
And that's the concern that I'm trying to express is I have confidence in you and the staff. I'm just not sure that we're actually getting at how much work this is going to involve. And yes, there's going to be work with the rental registry too, but my point is even that 150 figure may be too conservative.
I think the initial setup will be very labor intensive, but I think once the system's ongoing, I think 1 FTE would be sufficient. And once again, we use these numbers here. These are all estimations. Depends if a person's getting a family plan versus a single plan, that's a difference of 15, 20,000. Whether they need a computer and a workstation for 10, we can bring it to 7. That's a, these numbers are fluid, but it's right around that 125 to 150.
If we can go back to page 17, I just also wanted to clarify, because it can be a little confusing for people who haven't been in the weeds on this for months. When you talk about the tax revenue deficit of 1.7, having done the calculation of what it would actually save the taxpayer, that $148 figure, you then plugged in the $126 increase based on a total cost of the 1.7, correct? All right. When you calculate the 5% tax exemption on the left-hand side, you came up with the figure of 1.7 as a deficit. In order to make it neutral, you then calculated that making up that 1.7 requires $126 more for the 20% the 20% estimated that we're using for this exercise.
Yes.
Okay.
And the scenario is a $6,000 assessment. If you refer back to the housing stock or parcels on page 10, you've got 127 commercial real estate accounts under that. So there's a vast majority that's not in that example. Half of commercial is over $800,000 of value. And I had left you on your laptops the scenario. Basically, top 20 commercial accounts that range from commercial, apartments, industrial, and the impact of that on their actual bill. So we'll just take the first one, for example, Harbor Village. That would increase their bill based on this last assessment of year-end 12/31/24, $9,482. So it's not really that particular increase, only with that scenario. The bigger businesses are going to have a substantial increase.
Right. And, okay, I really haven't had time to analyze that, but that's also part of the concern here. And Councilman Veely's here tonight and has expressed previously the concern. This is, and the council needs to understand this, we're talking about literally shifting a tax burden here.
Yep.
And the business community obviously doesn't have the benefit of a homestead exemption. We need to be very careful in how we're doing this shift.
That's a great point. So when you come back, it looks like, well, it would be helpful to know what the tax increase would be for each of those commercial properties
I have
under 6. You have that?
those.
Where is that?
Yes, it's the sheet that we put
Oh,
in front
this
of you.
tiny thing that I can't
Yeah.
see? Okay,
Yeah,
thank
so
you.
this is just
Right,
these are the largest taxpayers in town, commercial properties.
I know, but I can't see.
And,
I mean, I can see, but
so if
I just can't see.
Can
like-
you walk us through how to interpret this spreadsheet?
Yeah.
Sure.
Sure.
So the
I ran this scenario last minute, so that's why I left it there, so I apologize for that. So to the left is the primary name of the business, and then there's a state code attached to the description of the account. If you look, there's the parcel ID, and then move over parcel building value, and then the total value. So you really want to look at the total value. So the old rate, meaning the current rate of $8.94, and then if you look at the next column, old to new, so it's the difference there between the $8.94 rate and the $9.15. So if you look to the right of that column, it's a $600K cap, 5% impact at $9.15. So it looks like that's probably the scenario you want to focus on.
What's, is it 614006?
You got it, that's the increase.
So that property owner will pay $6,000 more for us to, for the 5%? Wow.
Correct. And this spreadsheet went on and on, so this is just the top 20 taxpayers in town for commercial accounts. If you look at that bottom, the old to new 600K, that difference there, that 144,000, that's the collective difference with all commercial from the old rate of 894 and the new rate of 915.
So the collective will be $144 million more shifted to the businesses.
144,000.
104. What is it?
$144,135.70.
Okay, good plan.
Yeah.
Okay, I see.
Yeah, a lot of the accounts, the smaller ones, they're seeing an increase of about, bear with me one moment. Unhide that.
See, when I look at that is I also
Ranges.
think that the tax bill, which we'll talk about next month, what is it? 74% of the tax bill funds the schools, and not even 24% funds the town.
It's
So
about
you're
73
asking,
cents, right, Brian? 73 right now?
what is it?
So for every dollar that we raise in taxes, about 73 cents goes to the schools.
So 73% of your tax bill goes to fund the schools. So you're asking businesses who don't have children to educate, they're going to shoulder that burden because there's not a tiered tax rate, and then we're going to give them an increase. I just feel like that ends up getting passed down to the businesses that rent from those large landlords, rents and all of that. I don't know if I like that, the way that the shift is going to come out, but I appreciate that you did this, Wendy. This was helpful.
To that point, just to continue on, the current levy that's currently adopted for the town in the current year, the breakdown of between residential, commercial, and tangible. The breakdown on residential makes up 90.84% of the current levy, commercial makes up 7.75%, and tangible 1.41%. Under the scenario of 5% with the $600,000 threshold, residential would move from 90.84% to 90.66%, and commercial would go from 7.75% of the levy to 7.93%. So there is a shifting from residential to commercial.
Before we move off this chart, Wendy, there are two items that are highlighted. Is there a particular reason for that?
We combine those two Harbor Village apartment accounts. They're two separate IDs, but we add those two values together to when we do our top 10 taxpayers.
Okay.
Yeah,
Got it.
that's all.
Thank you.
And then that was the example I gave you for the increase too.
Can I ask a quick question about, you had mentioned all other properties, remember we were talking about that? So this scenario of page 8, is that the one that we keep looking at, the 5%? Nope, sorry, 17. There's only two numbers tonight, 8 and 17. That one. So that does not include if you own a condominium, correct? So
Correct.
if you live in Wakefield Meadows, or you live in the Commons, or you live at, what about South?
Those are all residential condominiums, and there's 987 of them in town.
So there's an additional almost 1,000 residential condominiums where that person probably does really consider themselves a resident and a property owner. So that would add
Yes.
1,000 people to be eligible, potentially, if they were. I don't think we understand the impact of.
I ran just the single family. It's so large. It'll get, we can run the scenario. It's not going to get nicer.
Are you following, Rory? So,
I just want to clarify. South Shore Village, that's across from Warden's Pond. It's the
No.
neighborhood right there.
it's the golf course.
Yeah, the golf course. One section of which is across from Warden's Pond. The other part is over by the Ratskiller. every home in there is not single-family?
Correct,
It's all condominiums?
correct.
All right, so we'd have to make this potentially
We are
work, I
building
guess
a
this
lot
would
of
affect the
condos.
numbers, but do we know how many condominiums there are in South Kingstown?
987 residential condominiums. The residential on leased land, South Shore, and what you're referring to is 961. So add those together.
So about 1,900?
You're good. 1948.
Okay. And obviously, that would impact the projected numbers here.
Yes. And then 2 to 5 family. Some towns add those in. That's 44.
So let's go back to, I think it's slide 8.
8 and 17. We need to be next to each other.
So we estimate about 1,900 of that 5,028 of all other properties consists of condominiums. So if we added that, for purposes of sort of including them in the single-family owner-occupied category, what would that then sort of reduce our all other property percentage to? About 25%?
So once again, if you expand the people eligible, the amount that can be shifted to goes down, and they will get a bigger burden. So if you're reducing the all others by 2,000 properties, the 3,000 that are left are going to get a substantially more impact.
See, this is, to me, this makes it even more unlikely to be at any impact, because even if you assume that the residential condominiums follow the same percentage of homeowners, right? So if you have 1,500 residential condominiums and 75% of them are owned by owner-occupied, you're adding, you're adding 1,000 or whatever into that.
The math doesn't work
The
even
math
worse.
becomes-
We don't know the math yet.
I think we
Before
were
you
just
jump to
asking the question.
conclusions,
You know,
I
just
think
wants
this
to know.
isn't the final meeting on this, and I know that knowing that information is not helpful to sort of moving forward with this path, but I think we need to look at those revised figures and see what that looks like. If we want to sort of expand what qualifies
So, yes.
for relief to include condominiums, let's see what the math looks like. That
Let's-
obviously will affect the 80-20, probably sort of reduce the spread there, but we don't know what that is. I mean, this is all speculation at this point.
So let's look at this. So it's for sure, I'm looking at the other property list. So for sure we want residential condominium. Residential on leased land, is that Tuckertown Village? Okay, well, I would,
That's included in the 1,900, which we just calculated.
It is.
wait, it's in the 1900?
It
It's
is.
included. If you want to include it.
You said there's 987 condos?
There's 900, I'm sorry, 987 for residential condominiums.
Yep.
Brandywine, trying to think here, Shadow Farm. Residential on lease, Tuckertown, 961. Add those together, 1948.
19 what?
1,948.
Okay. And then the mobile homes, those are not year-round living people?
Those are residential on lease. Oh,
Is that not Mary's? Is that,
they wouldn't,
so
they're
not
not.
Mary's, not Roy's? Right.
Council President?
Yes.
So the one suggestion I would make is, I don't think we're going to have several more of these meetings because we need to have concrete information before you're making a decision. So we can continue. So the first milestone I think we need to see is how many rentals are going to come in by March 31st. Then we need to see how many we can, maybe expand that to. And then we can do different scenarios based on condominiums, not condominiums, different models for you to chew on. But I think if the council can give us some consensus on what areas, like if you don't want to do the 700 or 800, we'll cut that right out. We'll really start narrowing this down. So if you can, 5 of you can come up with some consensus, what you'd like us to present at the next work session, that would be very helpful at this point.
Yeah. So number one, I think we're on consensus that as it relates to the personal exemptions, we'd like to see what the effect would be if we increase those income groups. Maybe look at, Wendy, you provided us a spreadsheet handed to us. Maybe we could look at what the,
I'll put that in a PowerPoint and
yeah.
be able to
So
see
sort of
it.
keeping the tax credit the same, but increasing the income groups that are eligible for the credit. I think that would be excellent to look at. As far as the homestead, I mean, definitely the scenarios which you just named, Jim, which would be, look at what the math looks like for inclusion of the condominiums, both condominiums where they own the land, or those also in addition that lease the land, whatever the distinction is there. Maybe we could get a look at both of those. At this point, I think 600, if anything, that would likely be the route if we are to get any consensus. So we probably can just focus on that and eliminate 700, 800. I think that covers everything here. All right. Any other thoughts before we open it up?
You actually could go down from 600 too. So you could
Maybe let's add 500. Let's just take a look at that.
You could,
That
because
doesn't require a heavy lift to just look at what the numbers show for 500.
Right. So we'll try and limit the pool, try and lower the amount.
Yeah,
And see
maybe
where we're at.
400 and 500. Yeah, but no lower than that. So that way, if we're including condominiums, we're expanding those eligible, but we're reducing the actual relief per tax for homeowner, I guess. So let's see what the math looks like.
Is it the intention of the council to include condominiums? Is that something you would want to decide?
We'd like to see what that looks like,
Absolutely,
yes.
absolutely.
Yeah, I think you have to.
Okay.
I don't know how you tell someone that they're not a resident. Right.
May I ask a question to Attorney Goins? Narragansett, and I can't recall off the top of my head, they do single-family, 2 to 5 family, and residential condos? Is it just those three? Just curious.
They allow it, the homestead on mixed use as well.
Okay.
If we excluded mixed use, would that sort of narrow those eligible? I mean, how many properties are mixed use that would even be eligible for what we're looking at here?
We'd have to identify which ones were mixed use, but you do have, in this scenario, resident, owner-occupied, mixed-use buildings.
And there is, how many of those exist in town? Do we
I
know
don't
that?
know off the top of my head. I don't.
Okay.
Combination, 669, 70?
670-ish total properties?
Yeah, 69, 70-ish.
So by excluding that, would have some impact here. Is that something that we could sort of take a look at too at a subsequent meeting? Sort of including all those condominiums, but excluding all those mixed-use property?
It's excluded now, so we just won't
it's
include it in
excluded.
this, in this
Okay,
area. We
gotcha.
only looked at single families because they were just so big, and like I said, then wouldn't fluctuate much, but let's see what happens if you want to include two. You could tell me exactly which ones you would like to include, but offhand, it sounds like we're going with single family, 2 to 5 family, residential condominiums. Do you want to do residential? and leave
2 to
land as
5
well?
family included at a subsequent meeting? No, that
No.
wouldn't work.
Okay, so just the condos.
Is it fair to say at a 2 to 5 family home, they're not all owner occupied? Only one, or I guess 2, or however many that own it and live it? Technically, it could
I can look to see
be.
out of the 484 2 to 5 families, what percentage of those bills are mailed to the situs and assume that maybe the owner lives there.
I mean, technically, 5 different people could live in 5 different units, but they all own it collectively, right? And then they'd be eligible if we included them.
Yeah, the
I
only.
do know a good amount of people in town that do own a 2-family, and
Yeah.
they do live, so it's up to you.
The goal is to shrink the pool, not expand it. I think if we expand it any more than we have, you won't see
Absolutely.
Again, I still feel like if you own a duplex, for lack of, you're gonna give everybody around you, but because you happen to have a 2-family, you don't get it. I feel like you have to, well, I like the research on what's the ratio of owner occupied and 2-family. So those are the things we need. But it looks like, I mean, there's a substantial shift. I don't know what that says. Is it the 1831, what percentage is that? 13%? Yeah? So we could go from 52, what is that, 52 plus 13, 60? Yeah, that's a lot. 60% of the parcels would be included in the homestead. I don't know. A lot of math happening in my head.
I think these are good parameters for us to work with and to narrow it down, and I'm looking forward to seeing the answers on all these questions.
Agreed. Any other thoughts? All right. Well, thank you all. Appreciate it. Very good information, good presentations, good back and forth.
Do you want me to present some alternate dates at the council meeting on the 9th?
Yes.
Okay.
And anyone in the audience who wishes to speak on this, feel free to come on up. We just ask that you introduce yourself. We're going to limit you to 5 minutes. If you have any technical questions, we'll do our best to have our experts here answer the best they can.
Jim O'Neill, Wakefield. Lots of information, most appreciative. You learn a whole lot more about this town in all these meetings. I think you know over the last few months, I've moved from the Homestead world to that of elderly tax relief, which most communities use over 65, and they don't quite have this battle about registries, etc. I think we need a new zoning category. It'll be commercial. It'll be residential commercial. We'll leave all the commercial properties we have alone. I agree with President McEntee and others that commercial rate, the regular commercial rate should stay there. But I think residential commercial zoning is in order. I think the city of Providence is an excellent example of college towns, vacation towns. They go by the tiered rate. So in other words, if you have two homes, one with the property owner living there, the other with $50,000, $80,000, $100,000 of income, and they pay the same taxes. Are you kidding? That's why the tiered rate in Providence is working, and I'd love to invite some of you to the real estate continuing ed courses I take. No one's happy up there, but they think this is the best system because their rates go from a broker-owned, let's say at $8, to a residential commercial that could be 3 times that, or 4 times. It's commercial. And you've got to change the rules on this. But anyway, what has really bothered me here is forget about beginning July 4th with the assessments over $1 million. I'd love to know what our number is, what the state expects to take in from assessing our folks that extra money. But the really one that really hurts is the 9% up from 6, 8.99 up from 5.99 on income of folks. And $135 million is slated to raise by the state budget office. There are 7,800 Rhode Island citizens that earn over $1 million that are going to cough up that $135 million. How many of ours? Why don't we know this number? Let's say 1% of the 78, let's say 1%, that's $1,350,000 gone, taken right from us, going to the state coffers. Suppose we're 3% of the state's population, which is the correct number now. That's $4 million they're taken from us. We wouldn't be here tonight worrying about homesteads or how to help the elderly or those with low income. We wouldn't even be here. It's all done. It would be done. So that's why I think you really have to consider moving from that homestead to tiered taxing like Providence does. Newport basically is in that vicinity. I mean, Narragansett, look, they're using us. They're using our community, using our success to feed themselves up in Providence because they're not frugal at the State House. Just not fair to the people down here. It just isn't. So that's what we need to do. You're talking about 1,800 some odd non-owner occupied homes. Send them a letter, let them know they've got a new tax rate coming at them. They'll answer it quickly. All right, no problem there. But do that right away. And lastly here, you know, I've got to thank Governor McKee here. A lot of guts. And If we want to help our taxpayers, A, I think got to do what I've suggested, but B, we need to change this world of energy going on in the state, what the state's Climate Act is doing here. Even Connecticut has eliminated the electrical vehicle tax routine of the bill of the Climate Act to this net zero emissions, net zero everything else. You've got to stop it. The revolution of new inventions will take care of those problems, but you need to get rid of these things, because what your families are paying in this town for an increase, what, $500,000 a year? I've already paid $1,500 more than last year. I've got electric heat, so you can understand why. But it's absolutely obscene of what people really are taking out of their family income, and it's energy, and we've done dumb things in this state. I happen to be a Bill Gates fan, and he has said, when you do a cost analysis, the benefits of that and the cost of families are like that. You've got to understand this. And I don't like windmills. I'm tired of killing whales, and I'm tired of taking down forests, which are the best sequential carbon folks that absorb carbon and don't throw it at us. And so anyway, lastly, I think you also have to remember, which drives me insane here, we're all upset with natural gas use. Natural gas saves our backsides, keep us from freezing. They are the backstop. And you can thank Governor Hochul in New York for stopping capacity increases of pipelines, not doing fracking, and what she wants to do in New York City, eliminate all the guts in the condominiums and apartments there. So I think we've got a lot of work in front of us. I know you're not concentrating on that tonight, but this is an alternative you've got to consider. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Jim.
So I was going to be quiet, but it didn't last. Just briefly, so I think when I was on council, I heard that about 1% of our land area is zoned commercial, and I think I learned tonight they pay about 8% of the tax. So I think that's the figure I got out of 7+. So I think the business community is doing their share, and again, very little impact to town services. We can go home. Thanks.
Thank you, Joe.
Brett Harrington, Wakefield. I think I speak for all the attendants in the room. Yeah, I was on the Homestead bandwagon, but after looking at these numbers, I mean, I want to spend 5 minutes after this presentation is done. You know, whatever you can change this to, this 80 to 20, you can't put it all on those 20%, whether you make it 70, 30, whatever. It's going to be minuscule, okay? And the 100, I agree with Councilman Bergner and Alley. Yeah, this is peanuts. You know, you can say, oh yeah, that means a lot to people. $150. You know, you put three things in a grocery bag, you're at $150. That's nothing. Okay. I was thinking along the $500. That's where you'd have to start. Well, you can't get that. Now that you see the numbers, the town can't afford to do it. So we can't be raising, you know, and killing these other segments of the town. So basically, give it to the elderly. Increase like you said you wanted to do, and cut it off there. That's it. You know, it's just as simple as that, guys. You know, it's just, and you can't, the money, you know, to the $155,000 or whatever it is, the cost of, you know, adding on another FTE, and nah, that's easy. This is easy, very easy. Give it to the people that need it. I don't need it, fortunately, but there's a lot of elderly people that could really use it, and leave it at that. Okay?
Thank you. All right, it's going to bring us to the end here. Thank you all for the good work. Appreciate it. Good information. And we look forward to continuing this discussion at a subsequent meeting. All right. Thank you all.